Tina Turner, a legendary icon in the music world, is the subject of a new documentary, perceived as a fitting accolade to her legion of fans throughout the world. Tina, by Oscar-winning directors Dan Lindsay and TJ Martin, traces Turner's six-decade career as an unbelievable feat over violence and discrimination, and premiered Tuesday at the Berlin Film Festival. Emotion-filled interviews with the singer covered her childhood cotton-picking years and dismal poverty in Tennessee, her singing debut with aggressive husband Ike Turner, and her loneliness even as the world's top female rock star. In the documentary, she explains why she decided to come forward in the 1980s about her years of physical, emotional and sexual abuse by Ike. She disclosed that even after the breakup, interviewers kept asking her about their partnership. "I wasn't interested in telling that ridiculously embarrassing story of my life, but I felt that's one way I could get the journalists off my back," she said. Winfrey calls Turner a trailblazer for talking about her trauma when it was still uncommon in the showbiz industry. Winfrey, who survived molestation as a child, said, "Nobody talked about sexual abuse, physical abuse, domestic abuse, period." Turner confessed that she still has recollections of being beaten. Her German husband, Erwin Bach, likened her to a traumatized soldier coming back from the war. The documentary also focuses on the impediments Turner had to face to become a stadium-filling sex symbol as a middle-aged black woman and the first black rock and roll singer to pack places like the Rolling Stones. A shocking interview in which a record company executive is quoted using racist slurs to justify dropping her from the label in the early 1980s is also included in the documentary. Turner and her Australian manager, Roger Davies, decided to relaunch her career from Europe, granted the unyielding race-linked radio categories of pop and R&B in America. Turner had the last say with her 1984 album, Private Dancer, which sold millions of copies worldwide, that included her first major solo single, What's Love Got to Do With It? However, Turner does not consider Private Dancer a comeback album, as it was released when she was 45. More poignantly, she said Tina had never arrived. "It was Tina's debut and this was my first album." She stopped touring in 2008, and near the end of the film, a fragile-looking Turner attends the musical about her life with Winfrey and Bach. Holding back tears as she bids goodbye to her fans from her home in Zurich, Turner says, "I should be proud of that, I am." Tina is screening at the 71st Berlin Film Festival, which runs until Friday. The UK government is considering following Australia's lead to make Facebook pay publishers for using their news content. Last year, Australia had announced its intention to make big tech firms paying news publishers. In retaliation, Facebook recently blocked the 13 million Australian Facebook users from viewing and sharing news articles. Many Australian publishers also were blocked on the platform. After a prolonged 8-day blackout of news on Australian Facebook sites, the standoff with the Australian government has ended and the news is back on. The media giant has reached an agreement with the Australian government over its new media code. Henry Ford Walker, Deputy Chairman of the UK News Media Association, said that Facebook's actions in Australia were a classic example of a dominant player using its monopoly power to bully others. Governments worldwide realised it's high time that big tech platforms need to be regulated in some form. So not only UK but Canada and Europe are also planning to implement Australia-like regulations. Canadian Heritage Minister Stephen Guilbeault slammed Facebook's new blockade in Australia as highly irresponsible and suggested that if more nations adopt similar resolutions, it will be harder for big tech firms like Facebook to do as they wish. Fernando de Yaza, the president of News Media Europe, said that Australia's experience with big tech had shown a need to address the imbalance between Europe's press sector and powerful online gatekeepers like social media platform Facebook. London might introduce legislation to control big tech's use of news content sometime later this year. We're obviously concerned about access to news being restricted in Australia. As we always have done, we will be robust in defending free speech and journalism. We're setting up a unit to promote competition in digital markets and ensure major tech companies cannot exploit dominant market positions, a government spokesperson told The Times. The Australian government has passed the media law that mandates digital platforms pay local publishers for news content. Johan Lidberg, an associate professor of journalism at Australia's Monash University, said that a mandatory arbitration clause would allow a government-appointed arbitrator to decide the price that an online platform will have to pay to a specific publisher. The arbitrator will only enter the picture if a 2-month negotiation between the two sides does not finalise into an agreement. The main game now is to keep very close tabs on how the deals are being made with media companies. If the deals stay with the major four and local and regional media outlets are ignored, Frydenberg can invoke the code and mandatory arbitration. It is what governments should do when market forces are as skewed as they are in this case, Lidberg told CNBC. We all know how animals can play such a big part in our lives. They become part of the family. And for those who lose a family pet to illness, it can be devastating. But what happens to the family pet when it loses its owner to illness? In this case, the COVID pandemic. And it's not only one owner, but two. And their family of 4 dogs are now homeless. Izzy 6, Oliver 5, Winston 5 and Isabel 4 are pups whose owner, 47-year-old Jennifer Stein of Long Island, New York, contracted COVID-19 and was hospitalised. Worried about her canine's family's health, Jennifer asked her dad, 77-year-old Barry Stein, to take care for them. He was also suffering from the virus but was still at home. Suddenly, Barry took a turn for the worse, and concerned for the dog's welfare, he contacted the Nassau County SPCA, hoping they could help. The case was just very hard because it was just the daughter and father, and that was it. It was just her, the dad, and the dogs, a spokesperson told People. Normal day-to-day care of the dogs became impossible for him, and although difficult to part with his daughter's dogs, her babies, he knew bringing the animals to the Nassau County SPCA was the only way he could get better and help his daughter recover, the centre wrote. They added, "We assured him they would be waiting right here for her when she got released from the hospital." A Nassau SPCA rep told People he just couldn't care for them anymore. He was having trouble breathing just getting the dogs out to us. Sadly, Barry's condition deteriorated and he died a few days after taking the dogs to the centre. Then the devastating news came that Jennifer had died 6 days later. We were all so hopeful the daughter would recover and she would have her babies to come home to. Unfortunately, that reunion will never happen, as Oliver, Winston, Isabel and Izzy lost their mum this past week. They've lost everything, the SPCA said. This is the first instance we've had an entire family die, and these pets have nowhere to go, Nassau SPCA President Gary Rogers told CBS New York. They've lost their pet parents and they are out of their home, and this is the side of COVID that nobody looks at. Rogers added that the SPCA is hoping to try to get all 4 of them in together with one family. The organisation added, "It breaks our hearts when we look into their little faces and they are asking when they could go home, but we are determined to keep those tails wagging."